Hi, LCC 155D, Stats for Informed Decision Making. This is going to be about Chapter 9 and looking at ways that we use statistics and how we gather our statistics. And of course, we'll be looking at Charlie Sheen's first hour on Twitter as one of our basic sources of information. Actually, not. We're not going to do that. Sorry. We're going to look at producing data and experiments. Now, this is a long presentation in terms of the PowerPoint, so I'm going to make it really short. The PowerPoint will be attached. You can look at the PowerPoint at your own leisure and take your own time. I'm going to be flipping through these quite quickly so that we don't get bored with just staring at a slide. But I will give you some of the things that you should focus on for this chapter and how to avoid bad research. So there are a couple of ways that you can obtain data, and that's observational study and experiment. Let's say for your final research project you wanted to do one of these things. Well, you could do an observational study. You can see what is involved in an observational study. An experiment. Now this is a bit tougher. There's a lot of ethical issues in dealing with experiment. It means you would actually do something to a person. If you would do something like that, you'd actually have to go through the internal review board here at USM to get permission to do this. I can't do it myself. I have to go through the board if I wanted to do an experiment in the university. So here's an example of the differences in the observational study and the experiment. The experiment, you create differences, you test something, cause and effect. Let's say that we had let's say two statistics classes, and I was teaching one, and Joe Schmo was teaching the other one, and I was using this type of different type of lesson and different type of teaching, and the students were doing fabulous. They loved me. They gave me chocolate whenever I asked for it. Meanwhile, Joe Schmo is still doing another old way, and the students hate him, and they're not doing very well in class. Well, that would be an experiment, and of course you can see why we would need permission to do that. An observational study is just looking at people. That's usually what social behavioral sciences will do quite often. They will watch people, they observe differences, and they compare the explanatory variable and to the response variable. Remember, we talked about that. Explanatory is the independent variable, and the response variable was the dependent variable. That was the x, and that was the y. So you can't always use an experiment, and you can see why here. And as I said, I'm going to be flipping through this. It can be unethical and impossible. Let's say you were doing an experiment to test a new drug, and you found that on the experimental side, the drug was really doing well, and there were very little side effects. Well, you could almost stop the experiment and then start giving the medication or the treatment to the other group of people. And there are a lot of things with these types of experiments. It could be lurking experiments. Just like I gave you the example of the two classes, maybe it's just because I have a different type of student in my class, while Joe Schmo doesn't have the same types of students. So that could be a lurking variable that could impact the study. So whenever you read a research, you have to think about these other variables, and the controlling of the variables is very important. So that's something that's beyond our bounds. That's why I don't recommend you doing an experiment for your final research. So here are some ways to find the solution to this problem. And again, here's a question. Won't look at it. The recent newspaper article included that smoking marijuana at least 3 times a week resulted in lower grades in college. How do you think the researchers came to this conclusion? Do you believe it? Is there a more reasonable conclusion? And you can go through the way that another case study, the effect of hypnosis on the immune system. This is from Science News, and you can see what the objective is. Here's a point I want to make. If you're doing a research project, and you are doing a research project, by the way, here's your objective, your hypothesis, to determine if hypnosis strengthens the disease-fighting capacity of human cells. That's your question. That's the hardest part of a research project. So this is an example here. Then you have the case study, 65 college students, 33 were easily hypnotized, 32 not. They did white blood cell counts, and then they viewed a video on the immune system, and they assigned them randomly, very important, always random, and you can read this on your own. And the results, hypnotized groups showed a larger jump in white blood cells, easily hypnotized groups showed the largest immune enhancement. So, is there an effect on the immune system? Is this an experiment, observational study? You tell me. And so we go on to other types of things. Weight gain spells, heart risk for women. You've probably read a lot about this, especially yo-yo dieting, that can cause heart risk for women. The fen-phen pills about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, was a cause for heart risk as well. So they took that off the market. And was it because of the pills, or was it because of the types of diets these women were doing to their bodies? So you can read these again, and let's see, this was done in 1976 with 115,000 women. That's quite a large group of women, and they had no previous history of cardiac disease. So here's the example, and again, you can look at this. So I want to move on to the next thing, explanatory and response variables. We've already done that. Subjects, factors, and treatments. You can look at this. Effects of TV advertising. Some of you have talked about doing a research project on does TV cause violence among kids, and you can look at all the research on that, and it's still open to controversy as well. And you can look at this. You know, you go through TV advertising, you see a commercial often and often and often. And does it really affect how, if you're going to be buying that? You remember Jolly John, the late Jolly John, with all of his car commercials? It was on quite often. Would you go buy a car from him, or did that annoy you? Do you go buy Progressive Insurance because of the advertising? Do you buy the Geico insurance because it has a cute gecko? You see that quite often. So that's something that they studied here. Kind of interesting if you're into that. And this is how they did it. So it tells you this whole thing. Comparative experiments, you can read that as well. The whole idea of this chapter is for you to make sure that you know what type of experiments can be done. And when you read an article, which is coming up for an assignment, by the way, you can make your own decisions as to whether it's valid or not. So here are the experiments, basic principles you have to do. Randomize. There's a placebo. That's a control. That would be Joe Schmo's class. He didn't do anything different in his class. Well, I did this great thing in class. I'm not telling you what it is because I haven't thought about it yet. The control group, that's what you're doing. That would be, that's to understand changes not related to treatment of interest. Okay, that's the control. That's Joe Schmo's group. So this is why these are very important. And there's another case study, randomization with the nicotine patch and so on. And so you can read about this. And this was kind of interesting. Mozart, relaxation performance on spatial tasks. I don't know if some of you moms and dads out there remember, but there was an issue where you could have your kids listen to classical music, especially in utero, and right when they were born, and that would make them very smart. There were studies made to see if listening to classical music while taking tests for young children would make them perform better on these tests. So you can look that up yourself. I'm not going to tell you the answer because they don't do it as much anymore, so maybe that tells you what they thought of it. So here's the big thing we're coming up to, statistical significance. And when you get these statistics, you have to be able to tell if it's really significant. Just because the numbers come out doesn't mean that it actually means something. So we're going to be focusing on this in the next few lessons. So if an experiment finds a difference in two more groups, is this difference really important? So it is my way of teaching stats really significantly different than Joe Schmo's? Big, big question. If this observed difference is larger than what would be expected, then it is labeled statistically significant. If I expected you to get all A's and you get all A's, and then his class got all D's, that might be statistically significant. But there will be other issues to determine the significance of statistical results, as I make a sound on a video that will be out to the public. Double-blind experiments, this is often used for research in medicine. The double-blind is that an experiment is conducted in such a way that neither the subjects nor the investigators working with them know which treatment each subject is receiving. Therefore, there's no bias at all. That's a very important and very strong experiment. And there's a case study using that. So you can read this case study. And this is a not double-blinded case study. Pairing and blocking, you can skip that as well, and match pairs design. These are just other designs you can look at. And you can make that decision on your own as to whether you think it's important. I don't particularly think it's the most important thing right now. What is important is getting the idea of statistical significance. And that's going to continue to be an issue with us in the next few weeks and towards the end of the semester. Especially when you make your research project, you're going to have to decide whether the stats you've collected is statistically significant. So again, I will post this PowerPoint online along with this video, and you can look at it at your own leisure.